So I would say right now, and frankly, throughout the year, the consumer has remained engaged despite quite a lot of doubts about consumers being able to navigate what has been a really eventful year in terms of risks, in terms of uncertainty. But consumers have proven time and again to continue to show up, continue to spend, and continue to make choices in terms of how to deploy their purchasing power very carefully.
This is Legends, a RenMac podcast with open conversation featuring some of Wall Street's brightest minds. I'm Neil Dutta. This episode, I'm joined by Michelle Meyer, Chief Economist at the MasterCard Economics Institute. From her perch at MasterCard, Michelle has a front seat to the U.S. consumer. So, I wanted to talk to Michelle to get a sense for the state of the U.S. consumer. We talk about consumer trends and what's driving the recent strength. Given the data fog due to the government shutdown, we talk about the benefits of large private sector data sets. Michelle was a former colleague of mine at Bank of America Merrill Lynch. There, among other things, she covered housing. So we get into a bit of a back and forth on housing as well. It was really great to catch up with her. Here's our conversation. Well, welcome everybody. I'm joined today by Michelle Meyer. In my view, she doesn't really need much of an introduction. Michelle, I think, was probably my first work wife, honestly, back at our time at Bank of America Merrill Lynch. We both worked under Ethan Harris, and Michelle went on to great things. I mean, she ran the US Econ department at B of A, and now she's working at MasterCard. And I wanted to have Michelle on to talk to you all because, I've kind of characterized the economy as sort of like three things, right? Like we have housing, which is kind of weak. We have AI, which is booming. And then we have consumer, which, we'll hear more about that today. So, sort of this sort of three-tiered US economy. So I wanted to bring Michelle on to talk about that. We're going to talk about more than just the consumer, but we are going to start there. Michelle, we had a conversation before just about what you can and cannot say. So we're not here to leak the retail sales data, but we are here to talk about the consumer.
Yes.
So tell me, where do things stand with the consumer right now in the U.S. in your mind?
Sure. So first of all, I just want to start by saying it is very fun to talk economics with you. It is something we have done for countless hours. Certainly when we were at Bank of America together, taking the walks to get lunch and talking about what we're working on, or just, complaining about whatever was going on in our lives at the moment.
Ethan.
No, never. We never talked about our boss that way. Only good things. But I've always found you to be a great person to compare notes with because you didn't take the status quo ever. You always tried to think about what is it that people are not talking about and how do you break it down in a way that resonates for your audience. So strong communicator, strong writer, and solid thinker. So it's fun to be back here chatting with you about the economy. And as you noted, we do spend a lot of time at the Economics Institute at MasterCard breaking down the consumer in every way possible, really trying to understand how consumer spending is shifting at the aggregate level, but also understanding what's happening kind of under the radar, right? And what we see in terms of our daily credit card spending data. So I would say right now, and frankly, throughout the year, the consumer has remained engaged despite quite a lot of doubts about consumers being able to navigate what has been a really eventful year in terms of risks, in terms of uncertainty. But consumers have proven time and again to continue to show up, continue to spend, and continue to make choices in terms of how to deploy their purchasing power very carefully. So when I try to look back at the year and examine the spending trends, the beginning of the year was a little bit softer. That was coming off of December last year. That was absolutely spectacular, right? It was a blackluster end to the holiday shopping season last year. And then it was a little bit of a softer start in January and February. There was also a lot of, special factors, whether it was weather, whether it was travel that was distorted. There was a lot that was going on. And then in the spring, we got hit with a confidence shock because of all of the tariff headlines. And that it mattered for consumers in terms of what they chose to spend on. Certainly seeing good spending do better than services spending and experience spending at that time. And then I have to say this summer, so the end of June through August has been a very meaningful and impressive acceleration in consumer spending. So there's been an inflection higher throughout the summer. And that is pretty broad-based. So still seeing spending on goods, but that I think delta into the summer from the first quarter was due to discretionary services, restaurants, travel, all seeing that recovery in the summertime. And now we are entering the critical holiday shopping period. So we'll see. And my sense is that it's going to be choppy, but still pretty solid. But it's going to be hard to decipher in real time because I think you have a consumer that is looking for value, and more value. So they're going to spend when they have discounts. They're going to spend when they think they're getting the best bang for the buck. And then they could pause at other moments where they don't see the prices that they want or they don't see the choices that they want.
The data that you're looking at, I mean, is it you're getting it in nominal terms? Or can you see?
Yeah, but we could adjust using the inflation basket, the CPI data.
Right.
So we get a sense of real versus nominal. We could also get a sense of the number of transactions, which is very interesting, right, which is a proxy for quantity and therefore for real spending. Sure. So you have that breakdown.
You saw that strong in the summer as well.
Yeah. It was both. Yeah.
So here's a question. I mean, do you think the consumer, so everyone is always like, I mean, you're kind of alluding to this too, is like, don't bet against the consumer, right? I mean, the consumer is always holding up in the US. So do you think the consumer is like a leading indicator, like for the economy, or do you think it's coincident? I mean, because I think in my experience, right, it's like, you've had recessions where consumption grows, right? I mean, so do you know what I mean?
So you had the 2001 recession and consumer spending grew in that environment, despite a weak labor market, in part because of the balance sheet, the household balance sheet and access to debt, et cetera. But no, I mean, I think to answer your question, is the consumer coincident or leading? I think aspects of consumer spending are more of a leading indicator. But consumption is almost 70% of GDP. So inevitably it's going to be coincident because it's what drives overall GDP. So yeah. And I think for why is that narrative held up for the consumer, that don't doubt the consumer in this cycle? And I'll give you a few reasons why I think it's held up so well. And it continues to hold up today. If you look at the last several years of uncertainty, there was a lot that was hitting the global economy. Whether it was, obviously most recently tariff, supply chain disruptions, the consequences coming out of the COVID period, relative inflation shocks, there was a lot. There was no shortage of uncertainty, of fears, of challenges, of reasons for people, economists in our industry, to continuously call the turn in the cycle. Recession's here, recession's here, recession's here. Recession has not been here, right? Like very clearly, not only has it not been here, the last 2 years, we had nearly 3% real GDP growth on average. So it was above the underlying trend. And that underlying trend growth rate or potential growth rate, I think, is another area of debate for good reason, given some of the secular changes in the economy. But I think the reason that the consumer has been able to hold up is that the labor market has largely held up, particularly the last 2 years. It was a very strong labor market recovery. Even once you take into account the benchmark revisions for last year, the trend in job creation was still strong, very low unemployment rate, and wage growth that was broad across sectors and strong. On top of that, if you look at household balance sheets, there's been some fluctuations, but I mean, you know better than anyone sitting in the markets, asset appreciation has been very, very strong for financial assets. Even if you're not invested in the equity market and you're sitting in a treasury or a money market or just a savings account, you're still been able to earn something in an environment where interest rates are a little bit higher. And then housing wealth has appreciated. So you have a positive wealth effect that I do think is making a difference for a part of the population as well. And it has continuously made a difference for that population in the last few years. So I think paying attention to the labor market is extremely important. And that's where I do think there's a healthy debate right now, because the labor market has shifted. Job creation has certainly taken a leg down. There's a debate over Is it labor demand? Is it labor supply? Is it a little bit of both? Is the market still in balance? The unemployment rate would suggest it's still in balance. Is it just a different balance? And what does that mean for consumers? But without a doubt, there's been some changes.
So here's a question. I mean, do you notice like shifts because of tariff announcements, right? Like, so the president comes out and he says like, we're gonna tariff, I don't know, upholstered furniture for national security reasons. All right. So do you see like people like rushing to like Restoration Hardware, and like, do you see that in your data? Like, do you see people reacting rapidly to tariff-related news?
I wouldn't say it's rapid, and I think it's very hard to pull out of the data. There was some evidence in the first quarter that there was a pull forward of some good spending, and that was across the board, not just our data that was in the PC data. It was very clear in auto sales, for example, right, where people knew the tariffs were coming for autos. It's a big ticket, durable investment, and people rushed to purchase their cars ahead of the tariffs. So yes, I think consumers are aware in a way that maybe they haven't been in the past. And I think part of that is because they just came off of a very high inflation cycle, and they just came off of a supply chain issue with the pandemic as well. So they experienced it, and it didn't feel good. So I think that there's probably some savviness in terms of trying to time purchases, but I think it depends on how big the purchase is. So maybe upholstered furniture, sure, if they think that they're not going to be able to get the product they want, or it's going to be a lot more expensive in the future. But they also have to have a need for it in their house. So there's still, a lot that has to happen. Maybe a new, computer or electronic gadget. But it's also going to be a function of what they see in the stores in terms of pricing. And we know very clearly, if you look at the CPI data, we've seen in our card spending as well, that it's not a rapid pass through of tariffs to the consumer. There's been a lot of buffers, seemingly, that are in place that's slowing down that pass through of the announced tariff to the consumer's end purchase price.
Right. Yeah. So we obviously have a shutdown. I mean, you mentioned CPI. I think it's interesting that
it's going to come out.
They've decided to release it for this month.
How can they release it? Do you know? Do they have enough?
Well, I mean, they have the data. I mean, so the OMB directed the BLS staff to come back in to publish the data. I mean, the tips market, as you know, needs the CPI data at some level, and obviously you need it for COLA adjustments, right? So,
that's encouraging that we'll get the data.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that we're releasing CPI and not the last NFP number, but I'll leave it to others to decide why that is. But I mean, I guess this is an interesting question because we're obviously, I mean, you in a past life, you were a desk economist, right? You would go over the hoot and you would talk about, this is what the jobs number did. This is what it means for our Fed call.
I loved that. Those were the moments.
Mean, it's very sort of like punchy, I remember when I had Ethan on this, he basically said like one of the most important things for a street economist just is to be very quick and to tell people like exactly what it is. But
and to have the countdown. Do you remember watching the clock? It was like 8:29, 30 seconds.
Yeah.
And then it hits 8:30.
Yeah, I mean, I'll never forget it. Like whenever you're on the desk and there's like some crazy blowout like ISM or jobs data, and like the entire trading floor was just going nuts. I mean, there was a rush to it, I think.
And then they swarm around you as well, right? So all of a sudden you have a lot of people behind you trying to decipher the data with you at that moment.
Yeah, and we'll talk about that in a bit. Like, I mean, whether we miss it, but I mean, but it's interesting that you mentioned CPI because obviously we're in a shutdown, right? The government shut down. Data are not being released, but you have access to this proprietary data set, right? I mean, and you kind of were leading the effort, I think, at Merrill or B of A, excuse me, when you were there, like the sort of investment institute and so forth. Yeah. I remember Janet Yellen once said that if she had like one indicator to look at on like an island and that was it, she would just pick the unemployment. She would pick the unemployment rate, right? Like just
the quit rate specifically. She loved the quit rate.
Yeah,
I mean, she loved all labor market data, but I think it was actually the
but it's like it was, like it wasn't really revised. I mean, you can kind of tell like which way is it going. But apply that logic to, like, if you had to say, like, I'm on an island, I want to know the health of the consumer. Are you going with the census data on retail sales, or are you going with the MasterCard data? And talk a little bit about, like, why, like, you're picking which one over the other, and what that means for, like, private sector data going forward. I mean, if because if we had, like, I mean, obviously, like, it's a very politically polarized environment, and we have, who knows, maybe shutdowns are more frequent in the future than they've been. I mean, it's already been, like, a lot lately, but at any rate, what can you say about that, for private sector data going forward, like how, other ways that the data can be sort of applied, and so on.
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly there's a real awakening to alternative data sets. And that has been happening now for a while. You referenced my days at Bank of America, where we started B of A on USA and analyzing our card data. We just wanted to get more data, just explore. We were looking at a lot of survey data at the time. We were just trying to figure out, how do you bring in as much data as possible to get the proper underlying signal. And I think that's still the case now. It's just, the more the better, because when you have a commonality in trend, the commonality of signal, then you can feel like there's more conviction behind it. So, I obviously am, because I'm so familiar with the MasterCard spending pulse data and what we see in terms of the pulse of the consumer, I would lean in the direction of leveraging our own data because of the granularity of it, the high frequency of it, the ability to see cross-border activity as well. So you can see things like tourism. You can see where people are traveling between different corridors. Fascinating to understand the tourism economy, which is a big part of consumer spending trends as well. And then again, that breakdown by different sectors and different geographies, even on a zip code level, right? Like, you can get a lot of information that you can't with just looking at
So
total
have you
retail
seen?
spend.
So I mean, now that you mentioned that, I mean, have you seen shifts in consumption behavior in and around the nation's capital? I mean, forget the shutdown, right? I mean, this goes back to, like, the Doge effort, right? Like,
Yeah.
putting people on, deferred leave, essentially, right? I mean, they can get paid, but they're ultimately not getting paid after the end of September. I mean, did you
Yeah.
notice any changes in consumption behavior?
So we did, I mean, we're constantly studying. We looked at a study of around the beginning of the year when we had some of the announced layoffs and realized layoffs, and looked at a control of the zip codes within the government versus the surrounding area to understand where there may be some shift in spending as a result of jobs. And there was a differential that lasted about maybe 2 weeks or so. It didn't last very long. And I mean, I think that's consistent with the overall jobs numbers as well, right? When you look at the DC region, private sector jobs are trending, I think, fairly close to the broader country. So there was the adjustment on the federal workforce. It did show up a bit in the spending trends, but it looked to be somewhat fleeting. We looked at prior government shutdowns and to see what our card data suggests there. And again, you can discern some evidence of a temporary adjustment, but then it bounces back entirely, just like the broader economy does, right? So when you look at shutdowns' impact on GDP, the basic rule of thumb is it slices between 0.1 to 0.2 percentage points from real GDP growth each week that
I
it's shut
love
down.
doing those studies when we were at B of A, because it's, like, always the same. It literally hasn't changed in 15 years. It's like, anytime there's some shock, literally any shock, right? I mean, you can tell me if I'm wrong. Shutdown? Oh
Skepticism, here
yeah,
we
a
go.
tenth to 2/10 off GDP. Oh, there's a tsunami and an earthquake in Japan. It's knocking the supply chain of autos. Yeah, a tenth to 2/10 off GDP. I mean,
But what you're getting at is not false, which is that I think there's a tendency to kind of lean in the direction of caution when you're putting out these big numbers, right? So instead of saying, like, "Oh my God, this is going to be a major impact," you're just like, but it also is the case that GDP is very large, right? It
yeah,
takes a
no, I
lot
know. I mean,
to move the
but
needle
I mean, look,
when it
we're all
comes
in
to
on the joke.
GDP.
I mean, it's just, we all do the work, and it happens to be a tenth to GDP. I mean,
Sometimes it's
I think
3/10.
with all of these things, I think just to kind of reiterate for our clients, I mean, the way we think about it isn't so much the hit to GDP, but just how long it drags on and what the forcing function is to get them to come to an agreement on
Of
these
course.
things.
I mean,
Um,
I'm going to throw it back to you. What's your sense of how the markets are digesting this?
Um, I mean, I think it's sort of the best of both worlds, right? I mean, the treasury market is kind of keying off more of the growth concerns, and stocks are on an island unto themselves for reasons, I mean, that we've talked about, right? Whether it's AI, I mean, so in other words, the bond market's, I think, paying much more attention to what the economic ramifications can be than the stock market. The stock market doesn't see much of a meaningful impact to corporate earnings. We'll see. I mean, what's interesting about this shutdown versus others is the president's threats to the furloughed workforce. Like, are they going to
Right.
get their pay? Are they not? Will he fire them outright? Like, why? Asking questions like, well, if we have non-essential workers, why do we have them at all? I mean, so but ultimately, it's really about that forcing function and to get them to an agreement. But I mean, my view is that these are just sort of like like ex post kind of rationalizing of like why the economy is weak. I mean, I think there are lots of reasons why the economy has been slowing down. Like what tariffs might be one part of it, but I think it really does kind of precede a lot of that with respect to
So
housing.
here's the point around the economy slowing down. Q3 GDP is tracking roughly 3% on an annualized
Yeah,
basis in real
right.
terms. Is that an acceleration from the first half of the year where the economy averaged about 1.6%?
I'm asking the questions here, Michelle.
Okay. All right.
No. I
Curious.
mean, I think. Well, I mean, look, if you were in a seat like mine, you would probably point out that um, it's well. First, I mean, people are talking about a productivity boom for this reason, right? Like, how do
Yeah.
you, right? I mean, so you have very strong jobs growth. Sorry, excuse me, GDP growth in the context of very weak hours growth, right? So
Right.
the total hours worked over the third quarter is basically flat, maybe even down when the final numbers are released. And obviously, productivity is a residual, right? So it looks like we had this great productivity growth. I don't actually think that's happening because it's very rare to see productivity rising alongside the adoption of the technology, right? So in other words, it's not when you're adopting the technology that productivity booms. It's after you've adopted it sometime after, right? Because I mean, you probably experienced this, like AI, you're trying to integrate it into your workflow. That process is time consuming. Like, it's not productive trying to make AI fit into my like workflow. We do that here, right? So
Yeah.
like so I don't think so. And so I think what people are seeing is like they're basically conflating. Um, I mean, to me, it's as simple as it's a vagary of the data, right? Like you have like like ISMs. Like ISMs are very sluggish. They're barely at 50, right? Like that's true for both manufacturing and for services. Total hours worked, basically flat.
So let
So
me put this. Let me
what's
put it.
the more so in other words, like what's the more stable measure of activity? Like historically, throughout
Yeah.
my career, I've always put more weight on the establishment measure of employment than I have on GDP tracking numbers. So it's not historically, it's also not incongruent. Like you've been in periods before where you've seen GDP rise for whatever reason and employment has been stable. And if it's slowing, you tend to put more weight on the employment data. And the last thing I would say is the reason people are all upbeat about GDP has nothing to do with actually like productivity or capex. You saw basically like lots of upward revisions to the consumption data, right? Like that's kind of what happened, and that was driven
Because you
by
had acceleration in consumer spending in the
yeah,
summer,
and a
which
lot of
was
that was, I mean, if the labor markets are weak, the income growth really isn't there to support that, which implies some drawdown in the savings rate. So if people are done drawing down their
the
savings,
realization of the wealth effect.
yeah, but home prices are declining now in most of the country. So it could go back to that sort of
But cumulatively, how much are homes up in the last 3 years? Double digits.
yeah,
Easy.
but I mean, I guess so if I think if you look at the housing market, I think what's interesting is you have a lot of recent buyers trying to put their home up for sale and then pulling the listing altogether. And I think the reason they're doing that is because they're in negative equity. And that's why they're pulling the listing. Um, And, I think that's probably creating a little bit of a kind of negative price psychology in the housing market. So
Or they're pulling the listing because they realize they can't get financing that's as attractive as their current home, and the math ends up not working given the rate that they may be able to get. I think there's, everything you say is perfectly reasonable, and that's what we love about economics, and we can do this for the next several hours of back and forth. But I also think when you consider GDP and you consider the economy right now in the labor market, in a way, it's just kind of a bit of a reallocation of resources, in the sense of more of that is going into capital, less is going into labor at the moment, right? In the last several months, in part because presumably there's not as much labor supply if you look at the data around availability of the workforce as well, because the unemployment rate
but
is staying very low. The labor market is still in balance. It's just in balance at a lower rate of growth.
Yeah. I mean, the last JOLTS number I thought was interesting because that, obviously the JOLTS data captured the entire month, right? There's not a snapshot in time as like the NFP data. And if you look at like hiring rates, they're actually going back down, right? Like, so it's really odd to see like hiring rates slowing and like investment picking up. Of course, the investment isn't really happening in a broad-based way. It's happening in one particular area of the sort of investment piece, right? Like if you look at non-residential structures outside of data centers, that's negative. If you look at even
but again, that's a shifting economy. Those are secular trends. So that's why I think when you just, it's right now, I do think it's hard to decipher the secular adjustments in the economy versus the cyclical adjustments. And looking at the slowing in jobs and saying that it's a sign of a cyclical slowdown in the economy, it also may be a function of secular changes in the economy as well. And that I think is hard to decipher. And it's creating some real, I think, tension for economists and forecasters right now.
Yeah. I think this is all going to kind of reveal itself over the next 6 months.
Sure.
I just, I do think that there's, there is some weakness, I think, in housing that probably spills into other areas of the economy. But getting back to what we were talking about before, we do have a payments analyst here at RenMac, and I'm sure you're pretty close to this too. But have you been following like the role of digital assets, fintech innovations? Like, how is that shaping how consumers spend? Like, have you been paying attention to that?
I think there's just a digitalization of the economy. We see it in terms of a greater penetration in e-commerce spending across many different markets. And when we look at our forecasts for the holiday season, we're looking for 3.6% year over year holiday spend, and
in nominal terms or real?
In nominal terms, and nearly 8% spend for e-commerce, 7.9% increase. So yes, I think the availability of options for the consumer has made a difference in terms of the digitalization of the economy and the ability to realize easier and more seamless spending. And that's something that MasterCard is very much behind.
And you look at like what's going on globally too, or do you focus primarily on the U.S.?
We look at it all. I mean, as you know, my heart is in studying the U.S. economy, but we have a large team to look at the rest of the globe as well.
So what international like markets are standing out right now? Like where do you see like increasing use of credit cards, like more, exponential growth? Do you see like which countries stand out to you?
I mean, for us, we're looking at it from a sense of consumer spending, not necessarily expansion of the payment system, at least for my team. That's what we're focused on. I think there's a lot of interesting dynamics playing out in Europe. Our European chief economist, Natalia Loknova, has an interesting call on Europe where, certainly the markets in Spain and Portugal and Italy have seen stronger spending, stronger economic performance, in part because of tourism, in part because of labor force expansion, which helps the jobs market. But as she's looking at to next year, starting to get a little bit more positive about momentum that could develop in Germany as well. So trying to really track that carefully in our card data as we get into the turn of the year. And then the emerging countries are fascinating. I mean, throughout LAC, we have a great economist who sits in Brazil, our chief economist of Latin America, Gustavo Arruda. Brazil is a complex market. All of LAC is complex. But the reality is that the unemployment rates remain fairly low across the region as well. And spending trends are remaining in a world where there's a lot of variability of inflation. So that's always something that we have to decipher in the card data when we look at those markets.
Is the U.S. Like the relative outperformer globally? Or is it lagging? Like, is Europe outperforming the U.S. like in terms of consumption or?
I mean, the US has been, right, the story of exceptionalism for the last several years. Um, you know, that has altered somewhat in a world where tariffs have kicked in. But I don't think it has changed the overall picture tremendously. I think there's still a lot of reasons to be bullish on the US economy in terms of how dynamic this economy has proven to be time and again.
Oh, someone much more bullish than me. All right,
Which is typically hard to do because you're usually pretty bullish. Have you changed your tone recently?
I mean, I've been caught. I mean, it sort of started last year. I mean, um, we
I feel
called
like
for.
you're a glass half full type of person.
I mean, I am, yeah. But look. I mean, I don't know. Like being cautious has kind of served me well, I guess. I mean, we had, I remember. I mean, last year we talked about 50 in September. That was because of the labor market being weak. Um, this year. I mean, to me right now, like I think for the markets, it's really tough because I don't think the markets are really pricing in any left tail risk at all. I mean, obviously, you can see that with stocks being at highs and credit spreads being very low. And so, I guess the question is, it's really tough to kind of simultaneously, I think, price in potential left tail risks to growth, but also like this right tail risk with like new economy dynamics because of AI. And I think that tension is really, really tough. So that's kind of where I am right now. But I mean, the housing market is sucking wind. You know what I mean? Like I don't even think that's really a debatable point. And things like building permits, cycle lows. How much unsold inventory are home builders sitting on? That's continuing to go up, even though rates have come down a little bit, right? Like, so all the builders are talking about how, even though mortgage rates have come down, they haven't really seen demand respond. So, to me, that's a concern. It just,
Are you tracking mortgage applications for
yeah, they're
purchase
basically,
applications?
yeah, they've, I mean, interest rates are down, what, 20, 25 basis points over the last several months. And during that time, purchase demand is actually flat to down. So it's not,
Well, last month's pending home sales, didn't that see a big jump higher?
I mean, it may have, but if you zoom, I mean, so I guess the thing is that there's a lot more sellers in the market, right? So that should pull transactions up to some extent. But I mean, even if you look at,
So I don't know how many more sellers there are in the market. I think there is still a potential inventory distortion because of the mortgage lock-in effect, and that's not going to go away with a 25 basis point drop in mortgage rates. It's going to take a lot more of that to get a lot of those potential move-up buyers or typical transition homeowners to want to forego their 2.5% record low mortgage rate, and that's why we've seen a lot of renovation work. Right, if you look
yeah,
at
so
other forms of construction spending.
I guess, but I guess if buyers were that strong, like you wouldn't. I mean, I guess the issue right now is that prices are declining in Florida pretty significantly. They're declining in Texas. They're declining in Arizona. They're declining in inland California, and that's all important because those are really where the builders make the houses, right? And so that to me is the concern. So if the prices are falling in the place where you have the most construction activity, that to me is sort of like a red light for home builders to kind of dial it back. And that's kind of what they're telling us, right? I mean, obviously builders have been doing lots of innovative kind of financing stuff, right? Because of where rates are, right? Like, so they're will buy you down. They're basically doing like a version of arms, right? Themselves, they're kind of taking it on their margin to kind of bring people through the door. But what they're finding is that even doing that isn't actually moving product anymore. And so if they're taking steps now to defend their margin, it means that builders are going to have to give up a little bit of volume, and that's kind of where we are right now, in my opinion. And I think that's why home building stocks have kind of adjusted, here, and you haven't really seen much of a juice to housing stocks, even though interest rates have come down. So that to me is a bit of a concern. It's exactly the opposite of what happened in late 2022, right? I mean, in late 2022, obviously the Fed was hiking aggressively, and despite that, housing was doing well, right? Like if you look at builder stocks, they were outperforming. Builder sentiment was rising. You had like a massive
Well, that
backlog of
made sense at the time because
yeah,
this was
they
in
had a
20.
huge backlog of homes that they had to still build,
Yeah.
right? But that's all gone.
And you had a consumer base that was flushed with stimulus.
That
And
too.
yes, interest rates were rising, but they were rising from zero.
Yeah.
So the relative rate was still somewhat attractive for a while in 22.
It's just I think it's really hard to make the math work for a lot of people if their wages aren't rising as rapidly as where mortgage rates currently are, right? Like it's just like financing a 6% mortgage when your wages are rising 4.5% is one thing, but if it's like 3, then it's a little bit more challenging to make the math work. So that's kind of where I'm at. I mean, I think I've been telling our clients to kind of keep an eye on construction employment because the builders, frankly, they're probably sitting on a little bit too many, a few too many workers, I think, and that's going to require some adjustment going forward. But we'll see. I mean, it's still early goings. Construction employment has been declining for the last few months. We'll see if that kind of ramps up going forward. Michelle, I wanted to talk, just sort of like general interest stuff now, since we've kind of talked a lot about the consumer and the data you look at. I mean, you've gone from one big institution to another big institution, but it's sort of like a different institution, right? It's not you're not a sell side economist anymore. So do you miss that? Like, what do you prefer? I mean, be honest. Do you miss being a desk economist? Did you prefer that? Like, did you like the pace better? I mean, where's your head
You're
at?
asking a lot of leading indicators. Are you trying to make me say I miss working with you, Neil? Is
Huh?
that where you're going with
I mean,
this?
we haven't worked together for a long time, but yeah, I mean, but I do think that. I mean, do you miss the sell side?
I think it was a great time being on the sell side. It was a great place to learn. It was a great place to create a network. The investor community is smart and savvy and fast and curious. So the debates that we have as economists with asset managers, with hedge fund managers, with other researchers is always fascinating. People come with a lot of their own research and views, and it's thoughtful. And people have conviction, and it's fun when people have conviction in the room when you're talking and debating about the economy. And the trading floor is high energy and exciting, and there's so much adrenaline that's always pumping. I remember the day would go by in a second. I would leave work and be like, oh my gosh, I don't think I forget to breathe today. Like there was so much going on. But I made a decision to pivot, and that decision was the right one in every way. I
How are
love
your clients
where I
different
am now.
now? How are your clients different now from what you were dealing with
So
before?
the way that I would explain my role now versus in the past is it's really the audience. It's still examining the economy, but it's for a different audience, and it's for folks that are in the real economy that are trying to figure out how to expand their business. They're trying to figure out how they can price in this environment. They're trying to figure out how consumers are going to be able to navigate all of these big macro shocks. They want to understand the true trends in the economy versus all of these different headlines that are out there, right? What's actually happening and why is it happening? And what do we expect going forward? So it is incredibly uplifting when I feel like I can provide clarity for our customers around where the economy is going, and just help to see through some of the fog that's out there. So and I can tell when the light bulb goes on, right? If they ask a question, if I get a question, I'm like, okay, let's actually unpack this, look at the data, figure out why this theory is out this, or you saw this headline in the paper, and then what's actually happening. And when that realization happens in a conversation, it's more rewarding than anything I've experienced in the past as an economist.
Great. Yeah. It sounds. I mean, yeah. It's really been quite something watching you sort of like go V-shape in your career. So I'm happy to have been a small part of that, working with you at at B of A.
Well, back at you. You've done the same, Neil.
This was fun. Um, Anything else? I mean, any other things that we didn't talk about? You think that people would be interested to hear on the consumer?
I think we.
I wanted
we
to
have,
ask. I just thought of this. Okay,
okay.
electricity. Okay, so everyone. When we were talking about AI before, I mean, have you noticed like people spending more on the utility bills because of AI?
I don't think it's discernible. Are you paying more on your electricity personally?
Well, I mean, certainly, and I mean, there's a lot of chatter about how, I mean, especially in the places they're making the data centers,
Hmm.
right? Like, if you go there, like, and you
You
talk
can
to
dig
people,
deeper. It's not something that is
yeah, like
observable
I
at the
think that
moment,
would
but
be something
it's a good
interesting to,
it's a good research project. Thank you. That was a good
because,
idea generation.
because, yeah, I was just wondering because obviously, like, that's people are talking a lot about that, particularly in the places where they're making the data centers, right? Like, because it's really taxing the electrical grids in places like Texas and parts of the Southeast where these data centers are being built out to kind of accommodate the AI boom. And there's a little bit of resistance because the public sees, man, like this is driving up our electric bills. So anyway, just the thought I had. But anything else that you thought we didn't talk about that we should have?
I think we covered a lot of ground. I mean, I think we can keep at this for the next few hours, and I
Yeah.
would love to continue to debate you, but I think we've probably exhausted that for now.
All right. Well, thanks for joining me, Michelle.
Got it.
And it was a pleasure. And I'll talk to you again very soon.
Absolutely. Always fun, Neil.
All right. Thank you.
Have a great weekend.